the central question for everybody was, when is grassroots football going to be getting back up and running? And it didn't feel like that was going to be anytime soon, and it was obviously a kind of a worrying picture for us all. We fast forward a couple of months, and although we have a very long way to go with this virus, we are in a really good position, I think, in relation to football. I think the guys at the FA in particular have done a great job with government in getting us to this position. And we feel like we are, although the season is going to be challenging, of course it is, we haven't dealt with anything like that before, we are entering a season where the timings aren't too different from previous seasons. And there was a real fear that that wasn't going to happen. So I think as we stand here, I'm really encouraged about where we are and the season coming ahead, although there's naturally going to be quite a few challenges. I'm just going to talk you briefly through some of the return to football guidance. There is a lot of it, so I'm going to summarise it very quickly and also just point you to where you can find that guidance. And looking at a couple of the slides from some of the guys presenting later, it's brilliant to see a few leagues already taking that guidance on and interpreting it and using it directly. So if you just move this slide on, if that's okay, Amanda. Lovely job. So the very first thing is just to give you an indication of the guidance that's available. Now, I'll talk about our website a little bit later, but we've got a section on the website which is an update on grassroots football, and it sets out very specifically the guidance available for everybody. Now, that's split into some general guidance for the game. And that guidance is quite detailed, it's quite lengthy. I've spent a fair bit of time reading through it myself and going through it. It's the one that includes the player code of conduct. There's been quite a bit in the news about that recently, and some of the safeguarding guidance as well. There's a summary of that, and there's a set of frequently asked questions, and the FA have confirmed that they will continue to update those FAQs as we run these type of seminars and are able to put questions back to them. There's then some very specific guidance, so on risk assessments, on first aid. The first aid one's really quite technical, some quite specific guidance for facility providers. That's a bit more relevant for people that own and run facilities, but it's quite relevant for clubs as well. And then, of course, some very specific guidance for the National League and the women's football period, so getting to the slightly more elite levels of the game. Only the last couple of days we've had some very specific guidance come out for referees. That's been circulated out to all referees, and there's a summary of that, and that's split into people refereeing the grassroots game and people refereeing the National League system. The final document that I'm going to talk about a little bit is a question that's coming back a lot from clubs and from leagues and from providers in the game, which is essentially, what are our legal risks and our duty of care? What's the situation in relation to insurance? What happens if there's a claim against us? What happens if, heavens forbid, somebody contracts the virus and is seriously ill or dies? Does that come back to us? Quite naturally, these questions are coming up for everybody, and I've been doing a bit of work with Sport England, and they've got some very specific guidance on that, so I'm just going to talk you briefly through that as well. So if you just click onto the next slide, if that's all right, Amanda. Good stuff. So I think for the majority of the documents, so whether it's the referee guidance, whether it's the general restarting football guidance, the FA have very helpfully produced these summary sheets. So that fits onto one sheet of A3 or A4. It essentially summarises quite detailed guidance, and it's the kind of thing that I think you want to be using, and that clubs and leagues are already using, to distribute, because communication is a really key point in all of this, to distribute out. You can put it up in clubhouses, on boards, and it goes out really to the network, onto websites, all of that stuff. They're very handy kind of go-to guides that give certainly people playing and involved in the game a quick snapshot of what they need to think about without having to wade through a kind of a 17, 18 page document. Let me just summarise a couple of the key bits as I've worked through the detailed guidance. So again, if you just move on, Amanda. Lovely. So a few key points you'll see. I mean, the general guidance is obviously different for some of the various groups that I've talked through, but the general guidance is split into before you start a game, during the game itself, and then after the game. And this is something that we are very actively looking at the moment, because of course, and you'll get the update a little bit later, but we're looking at running the remaining cup finals, and this stuff is extremely live for us at the moment. So like you guys, we've been kind of poring over this this detail. So a few, I mean, there's an awful lot of information in there. I think a few of the really central ones, if you're a club or if you're a league advising clubs, I think I'd be saying, look, the first thing you need to be doing is being really clear on this self-screen check. And there's a very specific kind of checklist guidance that players, officials, everybody does. You can actually even do that at the venue itself if you want to be really vigilant. As people come in, you run through that kind of symptoms check. But the onus and the guidance here really is on the individuals carrying that out themselves. And it's the symptoms that have been very prevalent in the news. A couple of the really big changes. So the COVID-19 officer for each club is quite a significant change, a really important part of this guidance. And then the risk assessments is absolutely crucial as well. And that's why there is a very specific section and guidance around risk assessments. That includes a template that you can use to work through, which will be very helpful. The final thing before you start, I mean, there's obviously kind of a whole range of things that sit around it, but the track and trace guidelines are absolutely crucial. And a couple of people have asked, what do we actually do in that respect? Well, the really important thing is to know who is at a particular facility or game or venue or training session, and to have some contact details for them. Now, generally, if you're dealing with a club where you've got the details of the individuals, you might just need to take a register. But in all cases, you're going to need to be able to refer that information back to Public Health England if you have to, if there's some sort of kind of track and trace process going on. So you're going to need to have those contact details. Take a situation where you might have an individual involved in a game or a training session. They test positive for COVID a few days or a week later. They then say, well, look, I was involved in this particular training session at this club. Public Health England would then get in touch with the club and ask for the contact details of those individuals to be able to follow that up. So really important to look at the track and trace guidelines as well. During the game, I think there's lots of information again. I mean, the really basic premise here is that competitive football does not allow for social distancing, and it's been one of the really big debates with the government. In a sense, we've been granted by the government an exemption here to allow competitive football, which does breach social distancing guidelines, and they've been comfortable with that as long as we commit to social distancing wherever possible. So limiting some close proximity during the game. You'll have seen in the referee guidance, they're asking referees to speed up things like set play so players don't congregate too much, limiting things like hands touching the ball. And then, of course, at any moment that play stops, you engage in social distancing. That's kind of, at half time, before, after the game, even when you're engaging with the referee during the game. And there's also a very specific code of behaviour for participants that's in the guidance that talks about some of the key things that you can and can't do. The one that's of course been in the news over the last couple of days is potentially getting into trouble for coughing on your opponents, which is fairly standard common sense, I think, especially at the moment. But the press quite enjoy those type of stories. And then there's a bit less information about what you do afterwards. But again, I think the social distancing applies, of course, at all stages. The advice is fairly clear about changing rooms, which is it's saying, look, there are certain instances where you have to have changing rooms. For example, people with very specific needs. But on the whole, try and avoid changing facilities. People should be coming to the game changed, leaving changed with their kit, and dealing with that at home. And that's quite a significant change to the way we play the game now, but very important, because actually a changing room is a very, very easy environment in which the transmission of what they call these droplets can take place. So that's a really brief summary of the guidance. There's a couple of other points on this slide. Amanda, if you just click on them. and then just one more, that's it, exactly. So I think all of this, and you'll see this in the guidance, all of this is I think supported by really detailed personal hygiene measures, so things like how you wash your hands when you do it, not sharing water bottles, etc. Monitoring traffic flow quite carefully in various venues, and then really clear communications, and that's quite an important role for the COVID-19 officer. There's a point in there about the COVID-19 officer essentially briefing players before a game. I think for smaller clubs that's probably possible. I think for some of the bigger clubs that's challenging, but they do need to find a way to get a clear briefing to the players before games. So communications is absolutely key here. All of this, of course, underpinned by really important safeguarding measures, and that is at the heart of everything that we do. But essentially, the safeguarding measures we take, they do in certain instances have to be adapted on account of COVID-19, and you'll see in the guidance quite regularly there's some very specific reference to safeguarding there. I think that's a summary. If you just move on to the next slide, Amanda. So I think one of the things I just wanted to highlight for you is a particular document that's been developed by Sport England and also a law firm that work very closely with Sport England, that they're a really decent firm, and they've pulled together some quite specific guidance around the legal risks and the duties of care. And I would definitely urge, because quite a few questions have come back to us on the insurance implications and the kind of the litigation implications of all of this, and that's the case across all businesses and sectors who are grappling with this at the moment. So I'd really point you towards taking some time to download that, have a read of the guidance and digest it. It is quite technical, but there's an executive summary at the front that's really quite helpful in summarising it. I mean, I think the question, and we've had this discussion with our insurers, so anybody who's insured through our own insurance, which is SportsGuard, essentially will get this position. But essentially what they're saying and what Sheridan's are saying is, if you can demonstrate that you've taken all reasonable, and reasonable is quite an important legal term, all reasonable steps to follow the government and the public health guidance. The same thing with your bespoke national governing body guidance. So in this case, it's the FA guidance that I've just talked you through, and that you've carried out a full and proper COVID-19 specific risk assessment, and you've mitigated for these scenarios, and you've put the things in place that you realistically can, then you're in a very strong position. Even if the worst thing happens, you're essentially going to have shown that you've taken all the reasonable steps. Now, there's a bit in this document about, I guess, what you call disclaimers and opt-ins. That's an ultra safe way of doing this. So that's something that I think the FA do recommend if you can, which is you provide kind of opt-ins for people, and that demonstrates really clearly to them that they are coming into an environment where there is some risk. You've done everything you can to reduce the risk, but there is some, of course, like there is in everything we are doing at the moment. But I think the point that Sheridan's and Sport England are making here is, if you haven't gone through those really key steps, which is, what's the government public health guidance, the NGB guidance, and this risk assessment, if you haven't done those things and you've been seen to be kind of really kind of ignoring some of that stuff, then you do as a business put yourself, or as an organisation, put yourself at a bit more risk. So it's a very good guidance. It is very, very safe for people to come back and start doing all of this, as long as we follow that guidance. So, certainly from our insurers, they say that it's very unlikely, if you've carried out the right procedures, that a claim comes at all. And if a claim did come, then they're very confident that they'd be able to defend that claim. So important to follow that guidance, but essentially, some of these fears shouldn't be a brake on going out and getting this back up and running, I don't think. Good stuff. So that's a kind of an overview of the guidance. I'll just finish with a little bit on just our customer service changes, because it's one that I raised back at the last League webinar. It's just always worth highlighting just the change so everybody's aware. So a couple of the big changes that we've been able to make through lockdown. So you'll have seen this, but we've done essentially a major rebuild and audit of the website. So it is very up to date. There's lots of very clear guidance and information on there. And I think for queries from, in particular, clubs, I think it's worth pointing you to a couple of pages in particular. So the new support portal, which we've built with the help of our email management system, Freshdesk, lots of FAQs in there. 70% of queries can be answered by getting in there. You don't have to phone anyone, you don't have to send an email and wait for a response. It can generally be dealt with through the guidance on that portal. We also have been providing the latest information on all these COVID-19 developments through the Grassroots Football latest webpage, which is kind of front and centre on the website. That's where you will find all the documentation that I've just talked through there. We have made a major shift from the phone operating system through to our email management system. It's a much more modern and much more effective way of managing our queries. I mean, people were obviously reporting frustrations with the phones. That's both staff, but also our external customers. And what happened a lot is a message would be passed on, it gets slightly lost in the system, it's difficult to know exactly what's happened to the query. The beauty of the email management system is we can track all of this very, very carefully. You get assigned a ticket, there's a very clear record of the management of that query, and of course we're able to track how many queries are timing out and all of those things. So I would very strongly recommend that people go through either the website or the email management system. There is still a phone operating system available if people really need that. The other thing we've done, which I think has helped a lot, is quite extensive communication. So we put a lot out through social media and of course our website, but we've also been doing regular fortnightly newsletters for our members and webinars such as these to keep people updated. Okay, so I think that covers I think that covers kind of the main points that I was going to make. So what I'll do now is I think, if I'm right, Amanda, we'll probably take at this stage about 4 or 5 questions. I think we've got time for that. And then we'll move on to the next section. If you don't get your question answered, don't worry too much. Keep it posted on there, and we will try and cover that at the end. As I say, not all questions will have an answer to. I mean, essentially with all of this, we're learning as we go along with you guys. You're seeing the kind of the guidance that we've got, but what we can do is anything we don't know about, we essentially can refer that back to the FA and come back to you. So I know I've got a couple of questions already which I'll run through, and as I say, either put your hand up or pop it on the chat, and I'll come back to you. Okay, so I got a question from Jenny and a question from Graham. So let me take yours, Jenny. So how can you prove you've done a risk assessment for each game? I mean, I guess what you've got is the physical document. So I think what you probably need to start with, I'm thinking about a club perspective here and I'm interpreting the guidance, but what you probably start with is you say, okay, say the start of the season at this particular venue, we will take the FA's risk assessment template and we will do a full risk assessment for that particular game. Okay, so that's your starting game, your first game. And you've then got a clear record and evidence of everything that you're going to do to mitigate some of those risks. Now, what you then don't want to be doing is writing a whole new risk assessment for every single game. I mean, the reality is the guidance isn't going to change that much. But what I think you probably do want to do, because if you look at the guidance, it talks about the risk assessments remaining as live documents. I think you probably every week at least want to check and say, is any government or FA guidance changed that affects our risk assessment? Or is there anything different that's happening at this particular game that means that these mitigation actions need to change at all? And you probably just want to date it. So you might have a situation where 2-3 weeks, nothing changes. All you do is you put the date of the updated risk assessment, and you might put a note like, you know, no changes required for this game. But you might have a situation 4 weeks in where you do need to make one change, again dated, and the change. So you're essentially using the document, but you're just updating it as you go along. And I think my interpretation of the guidance is that that's how best to do it. So hopefully that answers that question, Jenny. Really good query. Graham, so you've asked, should leagues get risk assessments sent to them to make sure clubs are following guidance? That is the decision at a grassroots level. I think that's the decision of the leagues, Graham. So you can do that if you have the capacity to review them and want to, but I don't think it's mandatory. So what's interesting is at the National League level, if you look at the National League system guidance, they are requiring clubs to submit their risk assessments to the leagues for essentially, and also to put those risk assessments on the websites. I think it's good practice for grassroots clubs to do the same. And actually, if you think about businesses themselves, they're also, we've had to make our risk assessment open to all of the staff. So I think it would be good practice for each club to post risk assessments onto their website. But I think it is really up to the individual leagues to decide whether they want to look at that. I don't think it's something you could make mandatory or force the clubs, because that isn't in the guidance. It's only at the National League system level, I think. Got another question here from David. So can you send to the leagues the legal risks document that can be sent by the leagues to their clubs? So unmute yourself just to clarify that one, David. Are you asking that after this webinar we circulate the legal risks document that I showed and you guys can then send that out to your clubs? Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So that the leagues can run through it first and foremost, and then send it with a covering document to the clubs in their leagues. Can you hear me?
I can, absolutely, David. That is no problem at all. I mean, we'll be sending out, if I've got it right, Amanda, the slides from this session out to everybody that attended. So I think we can just include that document as well. It's also available on the Sport England website, and the link is on the slides themselves. But we'll include that in the information that we circulate. Good stuff. Graham, you've just got a little follow-up on your question from Connor about some venue providers are asking clubs for COVID-19 risk assessments to use their facilities. I mean, that you're right, Connor, and that's quite prudent of the facilities. I mean, I think you can see that the FA guidance is really strong about a COVID-19 officer and a risk assessment, which is the requirement of clubs. And I think although some of those things are difficult to police, clubs are taking big risks if they don't do those things. And I think that anything that can be done to encourage them to do it would be great. Okay, very good. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to that. Thanks very much for your questions. As Amanda says, keep posting them on the chat as we go along. But I think I'll hand over, Amanda, now to a couple of the live examples you were going to use.
Great, thanks, Paul. Okay, so moving on to the practical applications of this guidance in getting football restarted. As you'll all be well aware, leagues have very differing circumstances and setups. So today's guest speakers will discuss with us some of the changes they're implementing to increase safety and reduce the risk of COVID transmission in order to get their member clubs back playing as safely as possible. So as well as providing some good practice examples, these discussions will serve as much to highlight the challenges that are still faced by the leagues and their clubs for this safe return. We're also hoping that this and future forums will help increase dialogue and best practice sharing between the leagues to collectively find more and better solutions. So first up, I'm pleased to introduce Jason and Jenny Virillo from Woolwich and Eltham Sunday Football Alliance. They're a few weeks into the restart process, as everyone is, and we'll discuss some of the changes that they're implementing, also identifying a number of challenges that they've yet to be resolved. So again, please add your comments or raise a hand for discussion for any of the points raised. So I'll hand over to you, Jason, Jenny.
Thank you. Yeah, we're here. So Jenny will go through this this slide for a minute. I've got some concerns that I've got from the league perspective, but Jenny did create a bullet point, 10-12 page, sorry, not page, a 10 to 12 bullet document as a handout for member clubs that will hopefully ensure that they're compliant as we move forward. Have you got that on there? Have you got that slide?
Right, so I prepared a COVID-19 guideline that's for us as a league to give out to every member club, because there's, in my opinion, they need to be aware of the risks that they need to have for all the players and the people participating in the game, the officials and the supporters that may be there. And it's just a quick guideline to go through, maybe go through a training session, or to go through before every game, that could be fluid and could be changed depending on how the guidelines from the government changes too. And it starts off with each person that's attending to make sure that they have a self-assessment and make sure that they only participate if they're well with no symptoms, all the way through till at the end where the kit would need to go home to with the players to be able to wash themselves, and making sure that there's no socialising after the game, that they go straight off. Obviously, in amongst that includes the no spitting and no coughing in people's faces, and all these things that we feel is really important to have at a game for every player to know, because everyone needs to take control and be aware of what they can and can't do at a game. And if we don't supply that for them, then they're not going to know, because the clubs vary in their size and in the people that are working in them teams. We have some very big teams that have 10 or 12 different teams in a club. So you might have a few adult teams and then a few younger youth teams. But then you will also have some teams, some clubs that only have that one team and it's only run by one person. And so for all that work to be added onto that one person, it seems quite unfair. So we wanted to give them all a helping hand, and also to make it so that all teams would have the same information and potentially be following the same guidelines, so that there was a better communication between them, so they would all be on the same page, to have consistency with all the teams, and hopefully prevent arguments that could happen whereby one team would be policing another team. Really, we have the risk assessments that we've shared with all the clubs. That is definitely something that's ongoing, and something that you can only try and predict what's going to happen with all the information that we've been given to from the government to work out what we can and can't do, which is a bigger thing that would include venues, rather than just what happens during the game and for the players. So there's lots of information that you would need to have for the venues, because all the venues are very different, for the officials that may be at the game, and then also for the clubs and what you can and can't do. And then for the clubs to conduct their pre-match safety briefings, that's really what the COVID-19 guideline is for, because if they might struggle to put something together, they've got something at hand that's easy for them to have at hand and to use. Did you want to talk about the league adaptions? So we've got a meeting on Monday for all of our clubs, and in that we're going to speak about all the things that we've done above, and to give them an opportunity to talk to us, to give feedback, because friendlies have already kicked off and people are experiencing different games, whether that be because of the team or the club, or because of the venues, or because of the officials, because obviously lots of information has gone out to everyone. So this is an important time for us to be able to talk to all of our clubs and find out what their concerns are, and if there's anything that we can do to help them or guide them in making things safe for them for their games. Another thing that we're doing as a league to help give space for people and to be able to keep them safe is making sure that we're flexible in teams having different kickoff times. Some venues have spoken to us and said that they won't be having 10:30 kickoffs across the board, and they might have a 10:30 kickoff and a 10:45 kickoff in order for there to be less people coming and going at one time, and minimising and helping with the social distancing. And if any clubs or teams would prefer a 12:30 kickoff, that's okay with us as a league. It's down to the teams to communicate and make sure it's okay for them. And as regards to the full season of fixtures, we are planning for a full season of fixtures, but being very flexible because we don't know what's going to come up next, and we need to just try and adapt to what's happening as it happens, because the teams need to know that we're doing the best by them and that we are trying our best to give them value for money, and give them a whole season of football as best we can, because last season was a bit of a write-off for a lot of them. They didn't get their full season, and we want to help them as much as we can for this season coming. And for that, we have dispensation as to how their fees may be if we have a period of time out of football, because we feel that that's fair to the teams. And I think that's what we can do for now. So there will always be lots of questions ongoing, but yeah, we're just trying to do our best by them, really. That's it, I think. Unless Jason might have a bit to say.
Yeah. So the things that we've also spoke about as a league are the things that we probably can't control or haven't got answers for presently. So things like venues, and I think I speak on behalf of all leagues generally. There is such a wide spectrum of compliance to COVID-19 and the government guidelines and PHE as such. So my club played a game on Sunday where COVID-19 compliance wasn't great. The only compliance we had was the changing rooms were closed. There were too many people in one place. There was no governance around the use of toilet facilities. The pitches were too close, and generally, when we spoke to him about the risk assessment for the venue, it wasn't a good conversation. It ended within sort of 30 seconds. I don't think some of them realised the severity, because and I was talking to a couple of people. I think we're confused and slightly annoyed with the government guidelines currently, not just for football generally. Very confusing. You know, there's lots of people saying go to a pub with all your teams, but yet you can't play football in a relatively safe environment. So somewhere like the Meridian, where we've got the risk assessment from the venue, really well set out, and compliance, as long as the teams read it and comply, shouldn't be an issue. Whereas the other one on Sunday, very, very different. And it's how as a league we try and influence good behaviour and best practice, but also knowing full well that to be able to play football, we're going to have to use venues like this. And I'm not sure where the responsibility lies with regards to should someone fall ill, as Paul spoke in his area. So the compliance in-house as well. So we talk about the risk assessments from all teams. Now, who has overall responsibility? Is it the LFA due to them affiliating with the LFA or Kent FA, I should say, or is it because they're members of Westford that we hold the responsibility? I think Graham asked the question with regards to do we have to have a visibility on each team's risk assessment, because it shows good practice if they take these guidance seriously, as it were. I've got other questions about score, non-played fixtures, and I think you're really going to be reliant on players being honest. But should should a couple of people or a couple of players not be able to play or come down with COVID-19 symptoms the day before a match, and all of a sudden, you know, because they all trained on the Wednesday, for instance, prior, they all need to go in self-isolation. You know, how do we as a league then sort out non-fulfilment of fixtures? I mean, because there are fines for that. I'd like to think that it would be just replayed at a later date when safely. But, you know, you can imagine teams, oh, well, they're not really ill, blah, blah, blah. You know how it goes, all experience with this sort of thing. So it's trying to give everyone a bit of an honest overview, but knowing full well that some people, and they walk amongst us, will use COVID-19 potentially as a negative. I also look at other teams, non-Wester. So when we're playing at a ground that shares with another league, what is our compliance there? If they're not compliant with COVID-19, are we able to walk away? We haven't got responsibility on other teams. When we play county cups, you know, are teams and leagues going to be held responsible for walking away from fixtures when another team from another league is non-compliant? Public pitches, who polices and who enforces the regulations? Because we could go there on Charlton Park, for instance, which is a local borough Greenwich venue, and no one's there on a Sunday morning, and no changing rooms, and we turn up, and you can't stop Joe Public kicking a ball around close to you, and there could be 60, 70 people just playing a game of football. No COVID-19 guidance, and just they're very close to the proximity of us playing, and we walk away as two teams because we feel unsafe. You know, whose responsibility is that? So I can imagine these sort of questions coming in. And apart from a couple of other things, I was just going to talk about the COVID-19 officer. We have to, as leagues, we need to have a nominated person that we need to be aware of per club, per team, because Spring Hill have 3 teams, and we may not be we won't be at the same venue each week. Therefore, as Spring Hill, we need a COVID officer for each team rather than one club to give the briefings.
Sorry, there's just a couple of things on the slide that we haven't gone through. The referees' guidance and equipment, that they have their own guidelines, but with regard to equipment, not all clubs have flags in order to be used to communicate to the referee. So are there things in place that you could use instead if the referee doesn't want to bring his linesman's flags along because obviously he's scared of transmitting or receiving the COVID-19, which is understandable, and then the club doesn't have a flag? Is this something that really, because I think there needs to be a lot of communication on these things, which goes hand in hand with the cash that may be done for match games? Would you have to rely, if you're going to do things online, you have to rely on honesty and people and trusting that people will pay or turn up, because you could have an instance where a club could pay the referee before the game, maybe the day before. The referee, in all honesty, could wake up in the morning with COVID-19 symptoms that he should not go to that game. Then you have to wait and see if you can get the money back from that referee, and the vice versa. When you've got, you might not want to pay the referee until after the game, and then the referee has to rely on your honesty and trust that you'll pay him after the game. I know as a league we would help support and ensure that refs were paid for each game that they did, but it's just something else that is a bit of a complication and that we also need to help the teams with. So I think that's everything that we've gone through and all our concerns that we have.
So there are a couple of bits, Amanda, that I can just come back on, if that's okay, just because it links directly to the guidance that I gave before. So I think firstly, Jace, Jenny, thanks very much for taking us through that. And it's clear that you're being really proactive as a league to interpret the guidance and to do everything you can. And that in itself is really positive and encouraging. I think you've also highlighted really clearly just some of the practical issues with all of this, and that's natural because you guys are out at the coalface trying to get this up and running. And I think that the simple kind of point there is we are all going to have to feel our way into this a little bit. Lots of these issues are going to come up. A lot of it does relate to kind of common sense and people trying to kind of work their way around it at a local level. I think that the guidance can't cover all of those eventualities. I think it's really interesting. We look at the resumption of the game with cricket. They've brought up a couple of the issues that you have. So I think if you're a league, I think it's recognising that there is a higher level of teams not able to field players at every game just because of issues like, you know, the players themselves possibly having symptoms, but more likely they're shielding someone, they're a bit nervous about it. So cricket have seen a slightly higher level of teams not always being able to field a full team. So I think the way you've tried to build a little bit of flexibility in is actually exactly the right route to go down. But as I say, the guidance can't cover every eventuality, and some of these specific points you'll have to feel your way through it. I think that the point you make, Jason, which is where does the responsibility lie, is a really important one. And if you look at the guidance from the FA, it's very clear that the responsibility lies primarily with the individual club. Okay, so, you know, some of the instances that you've described there about a particular venue not quite being fit for purpose, it is essentially the role of the home club to carry out that risk assessment. Now, in some cases, they may need to do that in conjunction with the venue operator, and they may need to work with them. There are naturally sometimes difficulties with that. The venue operator might not have one or want to reopen. That might happen, but primarily the responsibility lies with the individual club for themselves. I think as long as you're doing what you've just laid out there, which is you're communicating the guidance, you're doing everything you can as a league to get the information out to the clubs, I don't think you can do more than that. The same comes back in terms of kind of county FAs and the FA. We can only provide and disseminate the guidance, but it's quite clear where some of that individual responsibility lies. The other point you made on the COVID-19 officer, you're right. In some cases, you've got clubs with many teams. They can't be everywhere. The guidance does talk about a group of people, a kind of a COVID-19 group being set up that does allow the officer to spread the duties a little bit. So making sure that it's not just them, but actually there's a group of people helping them do things like some of the match briefings. So that's just a couple of points to come back on there. Amanda, I'll keep quiet now.
That's great, thanks, Paul. Just a couple of comments in the chat. One from Jamal saying staggered kickoffs will be key, which I think a lot of the leagues are looking at. Another comment from David: some clubs are finding it difficult to contact and hire facilities, especially council and school venues. I think this is true. You know, there's a lot of places that are still not open yet. Staggered kickoff times would be useful with facilities that have multiple pitches, but players are used to certain times and arrange their days around that, so it may be difficult to arrange. I think that's all things that leagues have to consider and look at implementing and being a bit more flexible about as time goes on. Okay, so are there any more questions for the points that Jason and Jenny have covered before we move on? No more questions. Okay, so I'd like to introduce Michael Cole next from Hackney Marshes Saturday Youth Football League. This is a central venue youth league run by Hackney Local Authority. Michael will discuss the steps that they're taking to facilitate an October restart, also identifying some potential challenges. Again, if anyone can put comments or raise a hand for any of the points raised, we can pick those up at the end. I'll hand over to you, Michael.
Thanks, Amanda, and thanks for inviting me along to join the meeting. Yeah, so as Amanda mentioned, we're the Hackney Marshes Saturday Youth Football League. If you can move on to the next slide, please, Amanda. Okay, so our venue is centralised. It's a venue that's recently been revamped, or not just recently, I should say. It's in 2012, in alignment with the Olympics. It had a major capital investment. So the old marshes, what people might perceive it as being, is somewhat different. It's quite new and contemporary. So some of the pictures will kind of give you a vision of that. The new dressing room areas, new bar areas, meeting room areas, and also the pitches still remain there, obviously. Can you go to the next slide, please, Amanda? Okay, so the venue, a centralised venue, it has a south and north marsh. It's a quite extensive piece of green area. So on the south marsh, we've got 58 11v11 pitches, 6 9v9 grass pitches, and 5 7v7 pitches. We also have a pavilion and a bar and a cafe, and along with those, we have 31 change rooms and 2 meeting rooms. The North Marsh, we've got 6 grass pitches, which are 9v9. Pavilion and cafe that's been recently opened, that's about 2 years old. 18 change rooms and 1 meeting room. And then we utilise Mabley Green, which is about 2 minutes approximately down the road from Hackney Marshes itself. And there we have 2 full-size 11v11 AstroTurf pitches, 4 7v7 grass pitches, and 5 change rooms. Okay, next slide, please, Amanda. Okay, so the league, we have 55 member clubs, in excess of 180 teams. It's for age groups from under 8s to under 17s, 18 divisions, and we've got over 2,000 registered players that will be kind of participating in the league. Next slide, please, Amanda. Okay, so I suppose what we're all here for is just trying to understand how we can work our way through the complexities which lie ahead for kind of league and to implement the actual kind of league and playing of football. So for us, we want to kind of compile an inclusive plan that's got clear communication. I think we all have our kind of like perception on what we are getting as guidance from the government in regards to it being slightly ambiguous and a lot of room for actual kind of self-interpretation. So what we want to ensure is that we have a clear and consistent line of communication to anybody who's part of the actual kind of league. The mode of communications are quite important for us as well. I'm sure you'll appreciate looking through the documentation that's been published. There's a lot of text heavy. So sometimes that can turn people off in regards to wanting to engage and actually digest what's been kind of like documented. So we're looking at different ways in which we can communicate to people. Might be infograms, might be some short films that we're going to try and produce with our partners that we work with. So it gives a different variation on the information that can be digested by all that need to digest it. Multi-directional. For us as a youth league, there's a multi-layer of kind of like people that we need to communicate with in different directions, from our referees to our actual kind of clubs themselves, to our coaches, and indirectly to the parents as well, which is a key component of youth football. Adult football, obviously, you're talking directly to your adult kind of like players and members. But for a youth football league, then there's a huge consideration that needs to be made for kind of parents' involvement as well. In and amongst all the information that's been disseminated, of course, we want to actually offer as much guidance and support as possible. A lot of the clubs, or 100% of the clubs, will be, based upon a volunteer system, and that volunteer system will mean that they can't apply themselves 24/7 to this whole scenario, which is something that we appreciate. I work for the local authority. I'm a full-time kind of like a officer, so I can kind of extend myself, I suppose, a bit more in regards to offering guidance and support. Also as well, what I think Paul has alluded to in the actual kind of the meeting today, we want to ensure that all the actual kind of measures that we're implementing are reasonable, because that's one of the biggest kind of things that's been kind of stated via our actual kind of internal kind of like officers and our internal kind of head of insurance that we have, that we're fortunate to have as a local authority, is that our responsibility and what we suggest as an implementation of measures is reasonable, and that should ensure that it will kind of facilitate the idea that you've done everything that you can to mitigate against certain circumstances as a lead deliverer. That reasonable kind of step has to comply, obviously, with what the government guidance and the FA guidance, which has been disseminated to us. So that's important. And within that, what we want to ensure is the communication to the top of the actual kind of bullet point. It complies consistently. It doesn't leave room for ambiguous behaviour, which you will tend to find in youth football as well as adult football. That's what can happen when you give someone a section of grey area to work in. Then they usually really kind of like kind of do things under their own premise, basically to kind of work the system that's going to be of benefit to them. And also, we want to make sure it's practical as well. Once again, understanding the nature of who we're going to be engaging with, we want to try and ensure that the measures comply, but they're practical as well. Because if it is a situation where a measure is too impractical, what will generally happen is that they'll actually kind of, I suppose, kind of sidestep that and try to find a different way that wouldn't comply to actually kind of deliver their actual kind of like a way in which they'd approach the situation. So we want to make sure it's practical, but it also is reasonable and it complies. The next slide, please, Amanda. So the stages of our plan, we want to make sure we understand and establish the league's responsibilities. Once again, Paul stated the fact that there is a kind of onus of responsibility that will lie with the clubs. And also we need to ensure that we establish our responsibility that once again underpins the insurance policies that we have that are reasonable, our actual kind of steps and measures. So we will kind of ensure that everything that's of a level of responsibility that's assigned to the league and can be kind of like, I suppose, determined by the league, will ensure that we do that, whether it be through production of information, risk assessments, match day procedure. That's what we'll produce to ensure that we have covered all our league responsibilities. Now, it's important to add, with my discussion with our head of insurance, we need to make that information evident and clear, because there will be a point when we have to draw the line and say, now the responsibility lies with the clubs. And this is what we have actually kind of like, you know, made sure that we have been robust and kind of exact about what we will do. Now you need to ensure that your part to play in all of this is complete and done. So yeah, we'll produce all the information that we need to, that will be part of our responsibility, and then we'll disseminate and explain it to the club so there's clarity in regards to that. And we'll do that via virtual meetings, as the way the world is now. We have in line a special general meeting that will be towards the end of the month. One important factor that I'd like to mention as well is that our facilities across the borough, including Hackney Marshes and Mabley Green, they're managed on behalf of the council by GLL. So GLL will be a part of the plan, and they will be tasked with implementing their own health and safety risk assessment and their measures to mitigate against any risk for the venues themselves. And also as well our referees that will be part of the whole kind of like, you know, scheme of things in regards to delivering safe football as well. So we will meet with them. We'll reinforce the messages and the kind of like things that we are trying to implement as well. And of course, we want to ensure that there's an actual kind of reasonable way in which we're going to put in place all the measures that we are discussing with them. The next slide, please, Amanda. Okay, so what our plan includes, some of the measures that we're looking at trialing, looking at implementing and putting in place to ensure there's a consistency and understanding across the board for what we're trying to do all collectively in a safe way. One of the things that I kind of really see as an advantage for us is that we're a central venue. After hearing the previous kind of PowerPoint presentation with the fact that if you have to try and keep an actual kind of understanding and eye on multiple venues, how difficult that can be. But for us, as a central venue, there are kind of many advantages that we're trying to actually engage with and use those to implement our measures as well. So one of the big areas I think everybody's mentioned so far is about the kickoff times. So kickoff times with a central venue and the amount of pitches that we have available, that is something that we can implement and we can put in place. So that's one of the features that we would need to discuss with the clubs. We already have in operation in previous seasons staggered kickoff times anyway, but ultimately we want to even look at a scenario where we can stagger the kickoff times and the actual number of games that will be played on one given Saturday. So at the moment in time, all our leagues, they are named by colour, blue or red. So we will discuss the idea with the clubs at a special general meeting, playing games on alternate weekends, blue and red games. That will mean obviously a reduction in the number of games that will be played in a league season. But ultimately, because it's a centralised venue and there's no advantage of playing home and away, we can look at completing the season with everybody in effect playing at home, playing one game. And what that would do would even saturate the situation of traffic on one given Saturday by the fact that 50% of the teams that will play on a normal Saturday, i.e. red and blue leagues playing on the same day, then you'd only have blue leagues playing on one Saturday, then the next weekend you'd have a red league playing on the next Saturday with staggered kickoff times. So we're really trying to actually kind of break down and saturate the amount of traffic on one given Saturday. What we believe could be an advantage of that would be ultimately you would have a chance to not have so much work and tasks put in front of you as a club every Saturday. So at least you'd have not to implement all these different measures every Saturday, even though there could be a learned behaviour built up there. But we believe that for a lot of these clubs anyway, a lot of the actual coaches cover multiple teams as well. So we want to actually, in effect, reduce the traffic and reduce the work and the task and the onus tasks that will be involved with each individual club on one given Saturday. Different things we're looking at engaging with in regards to rules and regulations of the game. The document that's been disseminated by the FA via guidance from the government suggests that handling of the ball should be treated as a situation whereby we can sanitize the ball as many given times within reason. So we've looked at an alternative way in which to take away the idea of the hands being used for throw-ins. So we've muted the idea with the FA about the youth football. Could it be a consideration that we have a season of throw-ins becoming kick-ins with a caveat that the ball remains on the floor? That's something that we're looking to implement with the understanding and the actual agreement from the clubs. But of course, we have to get some feedback from the FA in regards to that being viable or not. Track and trace system. There are implications, obviously, in regards to a club ensuring that they have a track and trace system in place and the checks and measures that go along with that. And once again, we talk about responsibilities, be it that of the league or be it that of the club. In the information that's being imparted, that clearly demonstrates the club are responsible for track and tracing of their players within their clubs. But ultimately, there has been a discussion between myself and Amanda around the fact that, yes, that's that club playing on that Saturday. What are the implications of if one of the players in one given club shows sign of COVID-19, and that's on a Sunday after a game, the team that they played against on a Saturday, what the implications for that team that they played against on a Saturday, and what the implications of the league for ensuring that team are actually informed about that as well. So we can utilise maybe the whole game system and the full time to understand what teams have played against each other on a Saturday, and also the whole game system can give us all the details of all the individual players involved in the fixtures as well. So we can even be more implicit in regards to contacting clubs and teams and parents, etc., etc. One of the pictures depicts crowds. Okay, so that's another kind of element that's been mentioned in the documentation about the number of people that can be on the sideline watching games. So that's once again something that will be imparted to the teams. Of course, with youth football, there's a heavy reliance on parents being supportive of getting their players to games, etc., etc. So we have to ensure that that is something that's assessed, and we can make sure that there's an understanding from the clubs that there is an element of the number of people that can be in and around the pitch at one time, and where their position is in and around the pitch as well. And also as well, if anyone's been to Hackney Marshes recently, parking can be an issue. And that's made reference of in the guidance as well. But ultimately, hopefully with the idea of implementing the week on, week off system, then that will saturate the number of cars in regards to traffic parking on the venue. We do have security there on match days as well, so they can do an actual kind of process and system whereby they can ultimately have teams and clubs, or sorry, people entering in the car park, numbers can be capped, so to ensure there's not an overuse of the car park as well. Okay, last slide I think it is now, Amanda. Okay, right, so everyone will still have lots of questions, that's abundantly clear. We all kind of appreciate that we're moving into a new world, and within that new world there are things that haven't been trialled and tested. So we're to some degree kind of like adapting and being innovative in regards to how we approach this. And so within that, there'll be a lot of questions that will come back at us, but we want to ensure that there's a consistency in that answer, and the consistency in the answer. I suppose the first source of information comes from the FA and the government guidance, and that's what we want to do in regards to some of the major documentation or major kind of implementation that's been put out there to the wider football public via the London FA. We want to abide by that and use a consistency in regards to disseminating that information, such as risk assessments being all the same, being adapted from the FA. And so to minimise the amount of questions that will be filled in, because that's what we feel will be an overspill from this situation. If we have too many inconsistencies in regards to what we're trying to implement, then that will foster, of course, a lot of people that will be less assured. And of course, along with that, there'll be a lot more questions that we'll have to find answers for. Okay, that's about it for me, Amanda.
That's great, thanks, Michael. It's great to see that it highlights the difference between the things that a centrally run league can have influence on the venue, and non-central venue leagues, can support more but can't dictate the sort of percentage uses of pitches and stuff. There's no questions in the chat, so unless anybody's got any further questions, we'll move on to Jamal, if you're there, Jamal.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, where you go?
Oh, you added a slide. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone is well. Only one slide here. This is just to update that the London FA Cups and Competitions Committee have approved for the remaining 12 cup finals to go ahead. I've actually just organized another one. So 9, is it 9? No, we're up to 11 now, I believe. 11 of the cup finals have now been booked in. And as you can see on the screen, those are the dates available. I will circulate this. And this will be available on the website now as well in the cup section. I don't know if there'll be any questions on that. I know moving forward with the cups, I definitely want to get the round dates organized. I do need leagues to confirm when they plan to start. I've contacted several leagues. I haven't had a league get back to me. If I haven't contacted your league, that's because someone from your league has told me when your league is planning to start. For those of you who are currently on the call and around the league, if you could confirm with me when you believe your start date will be now, that would be great. If I get this information as soon as possible, I can complete the round dates probably tomorrow. So anyone running a league want to confirm when their start date will be? Now would be a great time. Okay. No one?
Yeah, we've got one. We've got Graham Hartnett, Jamal, 3rd of October.
3rd of October, that's great. Okay. First week, yeah, I have Westford's already, but thank you, Jenny. 3rd of October. Okay, and in the meantime, we have a question from Peter saying, will the cup finals be with or without spectators? As of now, there will be spectators are not permitted. That may change if the government guidance allows spectators, then that will change. But as of now, where the first cup final taking place on the 19th of August, we're planning for no spectators and only essential officials and players permitted at this stage.
We've got a hand up, Jamal from Barry. Would you like to unmute yourself, Barry?
Barry, I have the type of question, or feel free to unmute yourself. Okay, so we'll give no rush, Barry. Hopefully, I don't know if you're speaking, Barry, but you're still on mute if you are. If not, type your question or send us an email. No issue at all. Thank you for all the leagues who have responded in the chat. I know the next, I've had one or two emails from leagues saying it'd be great if I can get the round dates over. I have the round dates ready. I just don't want to have a clash. Like for instance, we see Graham Hartnett has mentioned that on the county side, a youth league will start the 3rd of October. So what I don't want to do is put the first round of the cup on the 3rd of October because we would always want a team's first match to be a league match rather than a cup match, and to get them to play at least 1 or 2 league matches before they play a London Cup match. Okay, Barry, I see here. So you're saying Wimbledon Edition will start on the 12th of September. That's fantastic. Okay, so Jenny, I contacted Lawrence Jones of the FA today, spoke with him. And any county cup or league cup finals are currently not permitted to have spectators. My advice to you would be to, if you are going to play your outstanding league cup finals, my advice to you would be to push it back as far as you can, as far back into August and September if you can. I know you're starting on the 6th of September, I believe, or the first Sunday of September. So you might want to push those back as far as you can, because if the DCMS and government guidance permit spectators, then you would be allowed to have spectators. So definitely push yours back as far as you can. That would be the best advice. If not, then unfortunately you won't be able to have spectators. If you are having the cup final at a park, you are permitted to have spectators. But if you're having them in a non-league ground, so any club that plays in step 1 to 7, if you're playing at Sporting Club Thamesmead or VCB Athletic, I know those are some of the grounds you traditionally have your League Cup finals. If you're hosting them there, then you won't be allowed to have spectators. But if you're having them at Meridian, not on one of the pitches, not the actual ground itself, or Charlton Park, for instance, then you are permitted to have spectators, because the FA acknowledged the difficulty of managing the public. You know, that would be very difficult. Myself and the Cups committee discussed that, and we were some of the Cup committee members said, hey, would it be the worst idea to have some of the remaining Cup finals at a local pitch, a park pitch, and then with some of the YouTube teams that we have, they would promote it, and before we know it, we would have a complete ring of people around the pitch, and that isn't something that we would want. So definitely going to have the Cup finals, as you can see, at non-league grounds, so we can control the entry and exit points. And that's it for me. So if anyone else can advise of their start date, several leagues have messaged in the chat, which is excellent. And if anyone else has any questions or can inform me of the start dates, that'd be great. I want to get the round dates out. I definitely want to support the leagues. I want the leagues to feel supported by us and by myself in regards to the London Cup. But we have to work together. I need that crucial information first before I can give you guys what you need. Hope everyone is enjoying this fantastic weather. Any questions, let me know. Now's the time. Okay, thank you so much for your time.
Great, thanks, Jamal. Yeah, I think you've answered all the questions. There's no, here we go. There's the one last question. Are you in talks with Kent FA so there are no clashes? That's from Jenny.
Good question. Very good question, Jenny. I need to get in touch with Kent FA. Last time I spoke to Kent FA, they told me that they were unsure if they were going to be running their county cups. So I had to get in touch with Matthew Dixon. I think he should be on furlough now. And then we'll do our best to avoid clashes. I know with the season shouldn't be condensed for Sunday League anyway. So we should have enough space to accommodate both competitions. And we'll definitely try our best, especially for a league like yours, where I know you have a lot of teams either in one of the competitions or in both. So we'll definitely do our best. I'll definitely have a conversation with Matthew Dixon.
Yeah, Barry's also asking about Surrey as well. Will you be checking in with Surrey about the clashes?
Yeah, so Surrey is a lot easier because we are part of the Capital Girls Committee together. So I meet regularly with Bob Dick. So that will definitely be possible. Surrey do have a lot of competitions, so that will have an element of difficulty. But once again, we'll try our best for the Saturday competition, because Barry runs the Saturday league. So for the Saturday competitions, it should be a little easier. And Peter's also a question. I thought so Peter's under the impression that only friendlies are allowed in August. So that is correct, but with the exception of County Cup and League Cup finals. I hope that provides the clarification necessary.
Great, thanks, Jamal. If there are no further questions on that for now, I'll hand back over to Paul for a brief coach education update. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda, and I'll keep this extremely brief. But I thought it was probably worth just giving our league partners just a sense of some of the changes playing out in coach education. So I think it's fair to say that's one of the areas that is changing really significantly for the FA over the next few months. So it won't have escaped anyone's attention that COVID's been very serious for the Football Association, especially from a financial perspective, and they're under a lot of pressure right across the business to transform how they do certain things. Now the coach education side is one of the areas that's seeing the most significant change, which is to more efficient kind of digital delivery, and that's primarily going to be around safeguarding first aid and the level 1, which they are planning to place through a digital program, very interactive but still a digital program. They're also centralising the delivery of coach education, which has a fairly significant impact on us, and we take on much more of a coach development role. Now, this is going to take quite a bit of work as a transformation. They're planning for those courses to be ready in the first half of 2021, ideally right at the beginning of March. At the moment, our courses are postponed. They have been through lockdown. They remain postponed at the moment, and we're just awaiting some guidance from the FA, firstly about whether we can restart the courses, because we've got a number of learners already booked on those programs, and if we do restart them, what the implications are going to be. So what's going to be the guidance around how you actually run those courses. Now, one of the things we will need to look at as a business is actually the financial viability of it, because there could be some quite significant risk to us financially through running them. So at the moment, just our coaching department are just fielding those queries. The courses remain postponed until shorter notice, and we're just waiting for a little bit more guidance from the FA. But I just wanted to give people a little bit of a sense of some of the changes that are taking place there.
Great, thanks, Paul. No further questions in the chat, so I'll hand over now to Jake Rosewell, who's going to take us through the safeguarding responsibilities in open age teams. Thanks, Jake.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Good afternoon, all. I will shoot through this quite quickly for you. I'm just going to request control so I can skip my way through it, if that's all right.
Yeah. Have you got that?
I should do. There we go. Oh, skipped on. So just there's some changes in open age football that are coming into play. Sort of we're pushing it from this season. The FA are looking to sanction it from next season, but it's just to give you guys as leagues a heads up where clubs need to be at, so we can sort of work with you guys to push this through so everyone is ready for when it comes in from the 21-22 season. It's now come into play that 16, 17-year-olds that are taking part in adult football need to be safeguarded. There's been a period of time where sort of children at 16, 17 going into those adult games get no safeguarding at all, and they're just sort of chucked into the deep end. So there's some changes in regards to that. As I said before, the FA aren't going to be sanctioning it from this season, so there won't be any punishments. It's more just a bit of education that we're going to look to promote and get clubs on board with. So hang on, with me, the slides are not changing. I'm breaking it. So clubs with under 18s in open age adult teams. This list below is the requirements for what they are to do. As you can see in front of it, it's a lot of links to it. Essentially, it is the same as any of you that have youth leagues. It's essentially exactly the same as it is for adult leagues now. So there's the Safeguarding Children's policy, which they will adopt and follow. There'll be a duty for the clubs to identify the teams that have 16, 17-year-old players in them. And then for those teams where that happens, the coaches, assistant coaches, medics, as it listed there, will be required to have a DBS completed and be registered on the whole game system as that role. So what we're looking for in terms of leagues is just to support the coaches through that process, whether that be answering questions in terms of DBS. By all means, contact us and we can give out some guidance. It's more, I think, if I'm right in saying, leagues and clubs should have been contacted already, so this might not be something new. There should have been some letters that were sent out from the FA a couple of months back prior to lockdown. So hopefully this isn't new information that's coming at you. Hopefully I can just add to the bones of what's already been given out there. It'll be that ensuring that the safeguarding policies are publicised throughout the clubs and the 16, 17-year-olds are aware of the safeguarding, knowing their rights in football and their policies, and the coaches are well up to date with all of their safeguarding responsibilities. Bear with me, the slides are not moving on.
Jake, I think I've just realised it's a left click. It's the opposite click.
Oh, is it the opposite key?
Opposite, but left-handed, sorry.
Wait, sorry, I'm breaking it. It's not liking it. There we go. Amanda, is there any way you can request control back and then skip on? Is that all right? That might be easier. So just some questions that have come up from us that we've had for clubs come to us and the FA have received. They've sent out some frequently asked questions that might answer any questions that you guys already have. So like it says there, any clubs that have a registered first aider or a physio, they will be required to have an in-date DBS check, as it is a regulated role. Amanda, if you can go on to the next one, please. So like I said before, it's all coaches, assistant or otherwise. They will have to have an in-date enhanced FADBS check. If they're a coach that already coaches with a youth team and coaches with an adult team, they only need the one DBS check. So if they have one due to their coaching with the youth team, they are able to use that in the open age adult football. They do not require another one. Next slide, please, Amanda. So this is important to highlight here. It doesn't matter numbers wise, even if there is one under 18 player in the adult team, the coach requires a DBS check. That covers, even if they're training with the adult team, they still require to have a DBS check completed for the coach, and be aware of their safeguarding responsibilities in terms of that. Next question, please. This has come up quite a few times. I know some clubs that you might be aware of, they're very keen to have all of their committee members DBS checked. It's important to highlight that that is not a requirement, as it says there. It's just a regulated role. The club welfare officer I will come on to just a little bit at the end, but it is only for coaches and people with regulated direct access to the under 18s. Next, please, Amanda. So I'm sure you're all aware the cost of it is something that keeps coming up. It's £10 to have the enhanced DBS check done, and it's valid for 3 years. You'll all be aware on the whole game system, most likely, of when it highlights to show that that is coming up for expiry. The process for the DBS is going to be changing. It's more than likely that clubs will be moved on to the online GBG system, where the clubs will have a PIN that they'll go through to register for a DBS applicant, and then it will go direct with GBG. So the likelihood is it will be less for us as a county to work with. It will be just supporting the clubs with those pins and establishing that they know what they're doing with that, which some videos will be going out very soon from my colleague Markel in terms of the DBS. It might be as well that they might come to you for verification purposes. Clubs that have welfare officers in the youth leagues may be verifiers anyway, so it might be worth just establishing which clubs have the youth teams and then going through them first as a first port of call, rather than coming to you guys if you are verifiers for us. Next slide, please, Amanda. As I said, so club welfare officers, the leagues that have got youth leagues will be aware that each club has to have a club welfare officer. Currently, there's no requirement for open age adult football to have that. That will be coming in the future. A date is to be determined for by the FA for when that will come in. We are, alongside the DBS side of it, we are going to try and promote this as best we can, because then it sets up everybody for being ready for when it comes in the future. There's no mad rush at the end. We're trying to give clubs and leagues as much sort of awareness as possible, so everybody is fully prepared. I know DBS can cause some issues in terms of GBG and things like that, so we'd rather get everybody the help that they need early on rather than scrambling at the last minute. A lot of teams or clubs have asked if it can be the same welfare officer for youth teams as it can for adult teams. Yes, it can. However, we would advise the clubs that have a lot of youth teams to have a separate one for adult teams, as it might maybe a lot of work to take on for that one person. So it's just about sharing the load, and obviously they can't be in more than one place at one time if there are any immediate issues. I believe that might be it from me. I think there's one more slide, Amanda, that just highlights any questions or concerns. By all means, feel free to contact myself or Nikita, who I've seen has answered a question in the chat very kindly for me. Also on our website is the safeguarding section. I would recommend familiarising yourself with that. It's got all the open age requirements for both leagues and clubs. So if you get any queries, it might be that the answer's on there. If not, then do get in contact with either myself or Nikita, and we will get an answer for you as soon as we possibly can. I think that's it from me, so thank you very much. Any questions? Silence is a good sign.
Yeah, no further ones, no further questions in the chat for the minute, apart from the one that Nikita's answered. Thanks, Jenny and Nikita. Thanks very much, Jake. Apologies for the left-handed mouse issues there. Live and learn. Paul, would you like to come back with any points? Have you got any comments to make to tie up?
Thanks, Amanda. I mean, yeah, just as we wrap up, I guess, just a little note to say thanks everybody for joining, because I think it's a really good communication mechanism, this, and something we're quite keen to continue to do throughout the season. And a particular thanks to the staff who've been on and given an update on their areas of work, and then of course to Jace, Jenny and Michael for giving us a real insight into, just as a league, what does this situation really mean for you and how are we managing it, and really encouraging to see some of the stuff they're putting in place. So yeah, a big thank you to everybody.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I'd just like to thank everyone for their time and feedback. We'll circulate the slides to everyone who's attended, and a brief feedback survey. It would be great to get your input to help shape future forums, and we'll share the documents as promised, mentioned throughout the webinar. So if nobody's got any further questions, that's all from us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.